Everyone dreaded the billionaire's wife, but when the new janitor stepped in, everything changed. The entire Hart estate went silent, not because someone screamed, not because glass shattered, but because someone did the impossible. Before we start, hit subscribe and like this video. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us create more great content, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's next. Now, let's dive into the story. In the center of the grand marble foyer, beneath the crystal chandelier that cost more than most people's homes, Mrs. Isabella Stone, the billionaire's elegant wife, stood with her perfectly manicured finger pointing at the antique mirror like a weapon. Everyone froze. The housekeepers, the kitchen staff, the security guard near the entrance. Even Mrs. Chen, who had worked there for 30 years, held her breath. They all knew what was coming. Isabella always found fault when she wanted to remind someone of their place. And today, she wanted to make an example of someone. But something unexpected happened. A voice spoke up. Not loudly, not aggressively, but firmly like bedrock that refuses to crumble under pressure. It was the new janitor, Marcus Johnson. A quiet man. A man who had been there only 3 weeks. A man nobody expected to even meet her eyes, much less challenge her fabricated complaint in front of the entire staff. But here he was, standing tall in his simple gray uniform, looking directly at the woman in the crimson designer dress, and saying words no one had ever dared to say. "Ma'am, I cleaned that mirror according to professional standards this morning. There are no streaks." Every worker gasped. The air itself seemed to stop moving. "Excuse me. What did you just say to me?" Isabella's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper, the one that usually came right before someone got fired. But Marcus didn't back down. His posture stayed steady. His eyes stayed calm. His voice stayed respectful but unwavering. "I'm saying the mirror is clean, ma'am. I take pride in my work." And then, unknown to everyone in that frozen moment, the billionaire himself, Mr. Liam Hart, stood just behind the marble column near the sweeping staircase, briefcase still in hand from arriving home early. He stopped walking. He heard the tension crackling in the air. He turned his head slowly, carefully. Then he saw it. His wife, the woman he thought he knew, her face twisting with a rage he had never witnessed before. And the janitor, a man whose name he barely knew, standing there with quiet dignity, refusing to accept blame for something he didn't do. Liam didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched, his heart pounding harder with each passing second, because something inside him that had been sleeping for far too long suddenly opened its eyes. And the next words Isabella hissed shook something loose in the foundation of that great house. "You're done here. Pack your things. You're fired. Right now." But Marcus's stance did not change. His dignity did not waver. That moment, that single moment, would crack open everything that had been hidden in the shadows of the Hart estate. And nothing would ever be the same again. 3 weeks earlier, the Hart estate looked like something from a magazine spread about modern American success. The sprawling property sat on 5 acres of manicured gardens, with fountains that danced in the afternoon sun and windows that sparkled like they'd been blessed by angels. Inside, everything gleamed. The marble floors reflected light like still water. The air smelled of fresh flowers that were replaced every 2 days. And at the center of it all was Liam Hart, the tech billionaire who believed wealth meant responsibility. The newspapers loved him. The man who built an empire on ethical AI and gave half his profits to education initiatives. The man who remembered every staff member's name at company events. The man who personally funded scholarships for underprivileged students and spoke at conferences about corporate accountability. When Liam walked through the halls of his home, he smiled at everyone. He asked the gardener about his daughter's graduation. He complimented the chef on last night's dinner. He was, by every measure the world could see, a good man. But the Hart estate had 2 faces, and the staff knew both intimately. Isabella's stone heart moved through the mansion like a beautiful storm that everyone learned to predict and fear. In public, at charity galas and tech industry dinners, she was grace personified. Her smile could light up a room. Her laugh sounded like music. She spoke eloquently about women's empowerment and the importance of lifting others up. Photographers loved her. Journalists quoted her. She wore her success story like armor, the woman who came from nothing and married into everything. But when the doors closed and the cameras turned away, Isabella became someone else entirely. The housekeeping staff learned to move like ghosts, invisible and silent. Maria, who had worked there for 5 years, developed a nervous habit of apologizing before she even entered a room. Young Thomas, barely 19, kept his eyes on the floor so constantly that his neck hurt by evening. The cook, Josephine, had perfected 3 versions of every meal because Isabella would reject the first 2 just to watch someone scramble. They never complained to Liam. How could they? He was so kind, so generous with their salaries and benefits. And Isabella was always careful. She never left marks that would show. No, her weapons were words that cut deeper than hands. A comment about someone's intelligence delivered with a sweet smile. A criticism of someone's appearance disguised as concern. A threat wrapped in silk. Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, had seen it all. She'd watched young staff members leave in tears, claiming family emergencies or better opportunities elsewhere. She'd held Maria's hand in the kitchen after Isabella spent 20 minutes describing how easily replaceable she was. She'd found Thomas sitting in the garden shed, hands shaking, after Isabella called him worthless in front of the other workers. But Mrs. Chen stayed silent too. She had a granddaughter in college, bills to pay, and the terrible knowledge that speaking up would only make Isabella more creative in her cruelty. The mansion was beautiful. The paycheck was generous. And the price of both was a silence that grew heavier with each passing day, pressing down on everyone who worked there until they learned to move through the halls holding their breath, praying today wouldn't be the day Isabella chose them. Marcus's first 3 weeks at the Hart estate unfolded like pages in a book he'd already read before, in different houses, with different names, but always the same story. Day 5 brought the flowers. Marcus was cleaning the east corridor when he heard Isabella's voice rise like a conductor beginning a symphony of humiliation. Through the doorway, he could see Maria standing beside an arrangement of cream roses, her body rigid with anticipation of pain. "These are atrocious," Isabella said, though the flowers were perfect, each bloom positioned with the care of someone who understood beauty. "Did you even look at the reference photo I sent? Or do you just enjoy wasting my time and my money?" Maria's voice came out small and broken. "I followed the photo exactly, Mrs. Hart." "Don't contradict me," Isabella snapped, her designer dress swirling as she turned. "Redo it. And this time, try to pretend you have some level of professional competence." She left Maria standing there, tears streaming silently down her face, her hands still hovering near the flowers she'd spent an hour arranging. Marcus found Maria in the service pantry 20 minutes later, trying to steady her breathing. He didn't ask if she was okay. Instead, he said, "I need your help reaching something on the top shelf," even though he was tall enough to reach it himself. She helped him, and in the simple act of being needed for something she could actually do, her hands stopped shaking. Week 2 brought the dinner theater. Marcus was emptying trash near the kitchen when he witnessed Josephine plate the evening meal for the first time, her movements practiced and precise. Isabella appeared, looked at the dish for exactly 3 seconds, and said, "Too much sauce. Remake it." Josephine remade it with less sauce. Isabella returned, frowned, and said, "Now it's too dry." Again. The third attempt was identical to the first. Isabella studied it with theatrical concentration, then sighed. "It'll have to do, I suppose." Though I expected better. Josephine's jaw clenched so hard Marcus could see the muscle jump. But she said nothing. She just scraped 3 perfect meals into the trash and started preparing something else entirely for her own dinner. That evening, Marcus stayed behind. He didn't offer sympathy. He just washed the mountain of dishes Josephine had accumulated, his movements efficient and thorough, until she finally exhaled and said, "You don't have to do this." "I know," Marcus replied, scrubbing a pan. "But the kitchen's too quiet without the sound of running water." By week 3, Marcus had learned Isabella's preferred weapons. She told Thomas that the other staff thought he was lazy, planting poison that would grow in isolation. She mentioned to Mrs. Chen that she'd noticed some silver missing and trusted it was just misplaced. She complimented Maria's dress while implying it was too tight, concern masking cruelty. Marcus said nothing about what he witnessed, but he began appearing in the right places at the right times. He helped Thomas carry equipment without being asked, his presence a quiet refutation of Isabella's lies. He made a point of complimenting Mrs. Chen's integrity in front of others, rebuilding what Isabella tried to erode. He left extra cleaning supplies in Maria's cart so she'd never run out during Isabella's inspections. The staff began to notice this man who moved through the mansion like water, finding the cracks where people needed support and filling them without announcement. He never spoke about his help, never mentioned the extra hours or the intentional kindness. He just existed in the spaces where cruelty had left wounds, offering something no one in that house had felt in a long time. Thompson watched Marcus help Thomas one morning and shook his head slowly. "You're going to make her notice you," he said quietly. "And when she notices you, she'll come for you." Marcus just nodded, his eyes calm and clear. "I know." 3 weeks of silence ended in the marble foyer on a Thursday afternoon when the light streaming through the windows made everything look clean and perfect and entirely false. Isabella Stone stood in front of the antique mirror, the one Marcus had polished that morning until it gleamed like still water. Her perfectly manicured nail traced an invisible line across its surface, and when she pulled her hand back, there was nothing there. No streak, no smudge, no imperfection of any kind. But Isabella had never needed reality to build her accusations. She'd only ever needed an audience and someone vulnerable enough to break. "This is unacceptable," she announced, her voice carrying across the foyer where half the household staff happened to be working. Not by accident. Never by accident. Isabella always chose her moments carefully. "Look at these streaks. It's like you didn't even try." Marcus stood 3 feet away, his cleaning cart beside him, his gray uniform spotless despite a morning of work. He looked at the mirror, then at Isabella, then back at the mirror. The staff around them went still, that familiar terrible stillness that came right before someone got hurt. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his voice level and clear, "I cleaned that mirror according to professional standards this morning. There are no streaks." The foyer didn't just go quiet. It went silent in a way that felt like the world had stopped spinning. Maria's hand froze on the banister she'd been polishing. Thomas stopped mid-step on the staircase. Even Mrs. Chen, who'd seen everything in her 30 years there, pressed her hand against her chest as if to keep her heart from escaping. Isabella turned slowly, and Marcus could see the exact moment she registered what had just happened. Someone had contradicted her. In front of witnesses. Someone had chosen truth over survival. Her smile was a beautiful, terrible thing. "Excuse me." "The mirror is clean," Marcus repeated. "I take pride in my work." Pride. Isabella tasted the word like poison. She stepped closer, her crimson dress moving like liquid anger. "You think you get to have pride? You think you matter enough to question me?" Her voice rose with each word, filling the space with years of accumulated cruelty finally given permission to show itself fully. You're nothing. You're nobody. You're here because I allow you to be here, and I can make you disappear with a phone call." Marcus didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't lower his eyes the way everyone else had learned to do. He just stood there, and his refusal to bend seemed to break something in Isabella's carefully constructed control. "You're fired," she spat out, her voice shaking now with rage. "Get out of my house. Get your things and get out right now before I have you arrested for insubordination." "Mrs. Hart," Mrs. Chen started, her voice barely above a whisper, but Isabella whirled on her. "Unless you want to join him, I suggest you be quiet." Mrs. Chen's mouth closed, but her eyes stayed on Marcus, and in them was an apology she couldn't speak and a respect she couldn't hide. Then another voice entered the space, calm and cold as winter water. "Isabella, what's happening here?" Every head turned. Liam Hart stood near the corridor to his study, his jacket over his arm, his briefcase on the floor beside him. His face showed nothing, but his eyes moved from Isabella to Marcus to the frozen staff scattered around the foyer like pieces on a chessboard. Isabella's transformation was instant and almost impressive. The rage smoothed into concern. The cruel line of her mouth softened into an apologetic smile. "Darling, you're home early. This is just staff business. Nothing important." "It seemed important," Liam said quietly. He looked at Marcus. "What's your name?" "Marcus Johnson, sir." "How long have you worked here, Marcus?" 3 weeks, sir." Liam's eyes moved to the mirror, then back to Isabella. Something shifted in his expression, something small but seismic. "Isabella, let's talk in my study. Now." The single word carried weight Isabella couldn't deflect. Her smile flickered, died, tried to resurrect itself. "Of course. But this matter needs to be addressed." "In my study," Liam repeated. "The matter can wait 5 minutes." Isabella's jaw tightened. She looked at Marcus one last time, her eyes promising violence delayed but not forgotten. Then she followed Liam down the corridor, her heels clicking an uncertain rhythm against marble that had only ever heard her confidence before. The door to the study closed with a sound like a cell door locking. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The entire staff stood suspended in the aftermath of something they couldn't quite name but could feel changing the air around them. Marcus picked up his cleaning supplies and began putting them away, his movements careful and deliberate. Mrs. Chen approached him slowly, her weathered hands shaking. "What have you done?" she whispered. Marcus looked at the closed study door, at the staff gathering courage to hope, at the mirror that reflected everything back exactly as it was. The study door remained closed for 20 minutes. When it finally opened, Isabella emerged with her mask perfectly reconstructed, her smile bright and brittle as she swept past the staff without a word. But Liam stayed behind, standing in the doorway with an expression that looked like a man who'd just discovered his house had been built on sand. Mrs. Chen watched him from her position near the main staircase. She'd watched Liam Hart for 3 decades, watched him grow from an ambitious young entrepreneur into a billionaire who still said please and thank you. She'd watched him fall in love with Isabella 5 years ago, watched him ignore every warning sign because love had made him blind. And now she watched him stand in that doorway looking lost in his own home, and something inside her ancient heart finally cracked open. She approached him slowly, her footsteps careful on the marble she'd kept gleaming for longer than he'd been alive. "Mr. Hart," she said quietly, "may I have a word with you? Privately." Liam looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. He saw the lines around her eyes, the gray in her hair, the weight she carried in her shoulders. "Of course, Mrs. Chen. Please come in." She followed him into the study and closed the door behind her. The room smelled of leather and old books and the coffee Liam drank when he worked late. He gestured to a chair, but Mrs. Chen remained standing. Some confessions required you to be on your feet. I need to tell you something, she began, her voice trembling slightly. Something I should have told you 5 years ago when you first introduced us to Isabella. Something I have carried like a stone in my chest every day since. Liam leaned against his desk, his full attention on her now. What is it? Mrs. Chen took a breath that felt like it came from the bottom of her soul. I trained your wife, Mr. Hart. 15 years ago, at the Grand Pearl Hotel in San Francisco. I was the head of housekeeping there. Isabella worked under me for 6 months before she left for bigger opportunities. Liam's eyebrows rose. Isabella never mentioned she knew you before. No, Mrs. Chen said softly. She wouldn't have. Because even then, she was exactly who you saw in that foyer today. The words came faster now, like water breaching a dam. She was beautiful and charming with the guests, with management, with anyone who could advance her career. But with the staff beneath her, with the people who had no power to help or hurt her prospects, she was cruel. She made a young housekeeper cry every single week. She spread rumors that got a porter fired. She would smile at a manager and then turn and say something vicious to whoever was closest. Liam's face had gone very still. Why didn't you say anything when I introduced her? Because I was a coward. Mrs. Chen's voice broke. Because I was afraid. Afraid she'd recognize me and have me fired. Afraid you wouldn't believe me over her. Afraid I'd lose this job I've had for 30 years. This job that pays for my granddaughter's college and my sister's medical care. Tears spilled down her weathered cheeks. I told myself maybe she'd changed. Maybe love had transformed her. Maybe I was wrong about what I'd seen all those years ago. But you weren't wrong, Liam said quietly. No, sir. I watched her do to your staff exactly what she did to ours. I watched good people leave or break. I watched Maria develop anxiety so bad she shakes. I watched Josephine lose 20 pounds from stress. I watched Thomas stop smiling. Mrs. Chen's hands twisted together. And I said nothing because my silence was cheaper than my courage. The study fell quiet except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Liam stared at the floor, his jaw working like he was chewing through years of willful blindness. I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen whispered. I'm so sorry I didn't protect them. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. Liam looked up at her, and in his eyes was a grief that recognized itself in hers. How many others? He asked hoarsely. How many other people stayed silent because they were afraid? All of us, Mrs. Chen said simply. Every single one of us. The truth settled between them like ash after a fire, and neither of them could brush it away. The doorbell rang at 7 that evening, urgent and insistent. Thomas answered it to find a man in his early 40s standing on the front steps, his shirt wrinkled, his face drawn with exhaustion and something that looked like desperation. I need to see Liam Hart, the man said, his voice tight. Please. It's about Isabella. My name is David Stone. I'm her brother. Liam met David in the study 10 minutes later. The man looked like he'd driven for hours without stopping, his hands trembling as he accepted the glass of water Liam offered. He didn't sit. He stood by the window, staring out at the manicured gardens as if gathering courage from the carefully ordered landscape. I should have come sooner, David began, his voice raw. Years sooner. But I was a coward. I told myself it wasn't my business, that it was handled, that bringing it up would only cause more pain. He turned to face Liam, and his eyes were red-rimmed. But I saw the news article this morning. Your company's charity gala. Isabella in that beautiful dress, talking about empowering women, and I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't let another day pass knowing what I know and saying nothing. Liam set down his own glass carefully. What do you know, David? 7 years ago, before Isabella met you, she worked as a senior coordinator at the Westfield Cultural Foundation. It was a prestigious position. Good salary, better connections. Isabella was brilliant at her job when it came to donors and board members. They loved her. David's voice cracked. But there was a young woman there, Sofia Rodriguez. 23 years old, fresh out of college, working as Isabella's assistant. And Isabella destroyed her. The study felt too small suddenly, the air too thick. It started small, David continued. Isabella criticizing everything Sofia did. Making her redo work that was already perfect. Publicly humiliating her in meetings. Sofia thought if she just worked harder, if she was better, it would stop. He pressed his palms against his eyes. It didn't stop. It escalated. Isabella started spreading rumors that Sofia was incompetent, that she was stealing, that she was mentally unstable. She isolated Sofia from every other person in that office. And Sofia, she was young and she believed that powerful people must be right, so she internalized it all. Liam felt something cold spreading through his chest. What happened? Sofia had a complete breakdown. Her sister found her in her apartment, unresponsive. Pills. David's voice dropped to barely a whisper. She survived, thank God. But she spent 3 weeks in psychiatric care. Her family wanted to sue, wanted to press charges, wanted Isabella's name in every newspaper. He finally sat down, his body folding like something collapsing. But I stopped them. You stopped them. I paid them. David's shame filled the room. $500,000. A settlement agreement with ironclad NDAs. I convinced them that a legal battle would destroy Sofia all over again, that the media attention would be unbearable, that Isabella would tie them up in court for years. And I believed it. I genuinely believed I was protecting Sofia. He looked at Liam with haunted eyes. But I was really protecting Isabella. I was protecting my family's reputation. I was protecting myself from the guilt of having a monster for a sister. Does Isabella know you're here? No. She thinks that settlement bought permanent silence. She thinks her past is buried. David stood, his movements jerky with suppressed emotion. But Sofia's still in therapy. She can't hold down a job. She has panic attacks that send her to the emergency room. And every time I see my sister on the news talking about women lifting each other up, I feel like I'm suffocating. Liam walked to his desk and pulled out his phone. What's Sofia's last name again? Rodriguez. Why? Because I need to hear this from her. From her family. Liam's voice was steady, but his hands weren't. And because if this is true, if my wife did this, then she needs to face consequences I should have demanded a long time ago. David nodded slowly, something like relief washing over his exhausted face. Her sister's name is Maya. Maya Rodriguez. She'll talk to you. She's been waiting 7 years for someone to finally listen. Maya Rodriguez arrived the next morning carrying a worn leather folder that looked like it had been opened and closed 1,000 times. She was 32, dressed in neat business attire, her dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested she wanted nothing to distract from what she'd come to say. When Liam met her in the sitting room, he noticed her hands were steady even though her eyes held the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying someone else's pain for far too long. "Thank you for seeing me," Maya said, sitting across from him with the folder on her lap. "I wasn't sure you would." "David Stone called me," Liam replied. "But I want to hear it from you. All of it." Maya nodded and opened the folder. Inside were organized sections, each labeled with careful handwriting. She'd prepared for this moment, perhaps for years. "This is my sister Sophia's medical records from Mercy Hospital, psychiatric ward. 3 weeks, like David probably told you. Severe depression, anxiety, acute stress disorder. She slid the papers across the table. These are the therapy bills. We're still paying them. Sophia sees her therapist twice a week. On bad weeks, more. Liam scanned the documents, his jaw tightening with each page. The clinical language couldn't hide the devastation underneath. Suicidal ideation. Intrusive thoughts. Inability to function in workplace settings. These are witness statements from 4 people who worked at the Westfield Foundation with Sophia and your wife. Maya's voice remained calm, but something sharp lived underneath it. They describe Isabella's behavior in detail. The public criticism. The impossible demands. The way she'd praise Sophia in front of donors and then eviscerate her in private. One of them quit specifically because watching what Isabella did to my sister made them physically ill. She placed another stack of papers on the table. These are emails Isabella sent Sophia. Notice the timestamps. 2 in the morning. 4 in the morning. Weekends. Holidays. Sophia was never allowed to rest. And the content, you can read it yourself. Corrections phrased as personal attacks. Professional feedback twisted into character assassination. Liam read one email, then another. His hands began to shake. The woman described in these messages bore no resemblance to the Isabella he thought he'd married. Or perhaps she bore too much resemblance to the Isabella he'd witnessed yesterday in the foyer. And this, Maya said softly, pulling out a small journal with a blue fabric cover, is Sophia's diary from that year. She wrote in it every night. I found it after they released her from the hospital. She doesn't know I kept it. Her voice cracked for the first time. I couldn't throw it away. It felt like evidence, like proof that what happened to her was real, even though everyone wanted to pretend it wasn't. Liam took the journal but didn't open it immediately. Why didn't you pursue legal action? Why accept the settlement? Maya's laugh was bitter. Because David Stone is very persuasive when he's protecting his family. And because Sophia begged us not to. She was terrified of Isabella. Terrified of reliving everything in court. Terrified of being called crazy or vindictive or opportunistic. She leaned forward, her steady composure finally cracking. My sister was 23 years old, Mr. Hart. She wanted to change the world through arts education. She played guitar and wrote poetry and believed the best in everyone. And your wife systematically dismantled her until there was nothing left but fear. Is Sophia? Liam hesitated. Is she here? Can I speak with her? No. Maya's voice turned fierce, protective. Sophia can't be in the same state as Isabella without having panic attacks. She moved to Oregon 3 years ago just to put distance between them. She doesn't want your money or your apology. She just wants to never think about Isabella Stone again. She stood, leaving the folder and all its terrible contents on the table. But I wanted you to know. I wanted someone who loves Isabella to understand what loving her costs everyone else. Because my sister paid that cost, and she'll be paying it for the rest of her life. Liam stood as well, the journal still in his hands. What do you want from me, Maya? Acknowledgement, she said simply. I want you to acknowledge that this happened. That Isabella did this. And I want to make sure she never has the power to do it to anyone else again. You have my word, Liam said quietly. Whatever it takes. Maya nodded once, then walked toward the door. She paused at the threshold and looked back. The janitor who stood up to her yesterday. Marcus. Make sure nothing happens to him. People who challenge Isabella don't usually survive it. Then she was gone, leaving Liam alone with evidence of who his wife really was. Isabella returned to the estate that evening to find Liam waiting in the living room with Maya's folder open on the coffee table. She stopped in the doorway, her designer handbag sliding from her shoulder. her eyes moving from the documents to his face and back again. For a moment, her mask slipped enough to show the calculation underneath. Then she smiled, bright and brittle. "Darling, what is all this?" "Sit down, Isabella." Liam's voice carried none of its usual warmth. "I'd rather stand, thank you. I've had a very long day of charitable work and I'm exhausted." She set her bag on the side table and moved toward the stairs, already dismissing him. "Sofia Rodriguez," Liam said quietly. Isabella stopped walking. Her spine went rigid beneath her silk blouse. When she turned back, her smile had sharpened into something dangerous. "I have no idea who that is." "Your brother was here. David. He told me everything. David is a drunk who's been bitter since father left him out of the will. You can't possibly believe. Maya Rodriguez was here this morning. With medical records. Witness statements. Sophia's journal." Liam stood, holding up the blue fabric-covered book. "I read it, Isabella. I read what you did to her. What you've been doing to people for years." Isabella's face went through a series of rapid calculations. Liam could almost see her trying different strategies, different lies, different angles of attack. Then her expression hardened into cold fury. "That girl was incompetent and mentally unstable long before I met her. If she couldn't handle basic professional criticism, that's hardly my fault." Professional criticism. Liam's voice shook. "Is that what you call it? When you email someone at 3 in the morning to tell them they're worthless? When you destroy their reputation with lies? When you push them until they try to end their own life?" "Oh, please." Isabella's laugh was acid. "Everyone's so fragile now. So quick to play victim. I had standards. I expected excellence. If she couldn't meet those standards, she should have found a different career." She moved toward him, her heels clicking with false confidence. "And frankly, Liam, I'm insulted that you would believe the word of some disgruntled former employee and her opportunistic sister over your own wife. Then there's Mrs. Chen," Liam continued as if Isabella hadn't spoken. "Who trained you 15 years ago? Who's watched you do the same thing here? To Maria. To Josephine. To Thomas. To Marcus." Isabella's eyes flashed at Marcus's name. "That janitor was insubordinate. He contradicted me in front of the entire staff. I won't tolerate." "He told the truth." Liam's voice rose for the first time. "He told the truth and you tried to destroy him for it, just like you've destroyed everyone else who's ever stood up to you." Isabella's mask finally cracked completely. "You want to talk about truth? Fine. The truth is that I built myself from nothing while you were born into money and opportunities. The truth is I've clawed my way into spaces where people like me aren't supposed to exist. And yes, I demanded perfection because anything less meant being dismissed or destroyed. So forgive me if I'm not gentle with people who don't work as hard as I did." "You're not demanding," Liam said quietly. "You're cruel. There's a difference. Think whatever you want." Isabella reached for her tablet on the side table, her movements sharp with anger. "I'm calling my attorney. If you want to believe a bunch of sob stories from people who couldn't handle working for someone successful, that's your choice. But I won't stand here and be attacked in my own home." She unlocked the tablet with shaking hands. The screen lit up, and Liam saw her face drain of color as she realized what was displayed there. An open message thread. A conversation she'd clearly forgotten to close. Liam moved closer and saw the header before Isabella could turn the screen away. "Divorce Strategy, Bennett and Associates." "What is that?" His voice was very calm now, the kind of calm that came before everything broke. "Nothing. It's nothing. Just..." Isabella tried to lock the screen, but Liam took the tablet from her hands. She didn't fight him. She just stood there, frozen, watching her carefully constructed world begin its final collapse. Liam scrolled through messages that detailed asset division timelines, optimal divorce filing windows, and strategies for maximizing settlement amounts. Then he saw a file labeled Insurance, Plan B. He pressed play on the voice memo, and Isabella's voice filled the room, recorded months ago, laughing as she discussed her marriage with someone whose responses weren't captured. 3 years, her recorded voice said, bright with amusement. That's the magic number in California for maximum asset division. 3 years and I can walk away with half of everything he's built. And Liam, sweet naive Liam, he'll never see it coming. He actually believes I married him for love. Her laughter was cruel and clear. Love is for people who can afford it. I married security. I married wealth. I married a man too blinded by affection to ask the right questions. Liam stopped the recording. The silence that followed felt like the moment after a car crash, when your brain was still trying to process what just happened. Isabella stood perfectly still, her face drained of all color, her carefully constructed empire crumbling around her at the speed of truth. The divorce papers arrived at Isabella's temporary apartment 3 days later, delivered by a process server who found her surrounded by half-packed boxes and the remains of the life she'd tried to steal. Her attorney read through the prenuptial agreement she'd signed 5 years ago, the one she'd barely glanced at because she'd been so confident in her ability to manipulate her way around any legal obstacle. It was ironclad. Every clause carefully constructed. Every loophole closed. She would leave with exactly what she'd brought into the marriage, which was nothing but her designer clothes and her ruined reputation. Maya Rodriguez filed a civil lawsuit the following week. 3 former colleagues from the Westfield Foundation joined her, their witness statements detailed and damning. The district attorney's office opened an investigation into workplace harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Isabella's face appeared in news articles, but not the way she'd always imagined. The headlines called her an abuser, a manipulator, a cautionary tale about unchecked power. At the Hart estate, the staff gathered in the main sitting room for a meeting Liam called on a bright Tuesday morning. They came nervously, still conditioned to expect punishment when summoned. But Liam stood before them with Mrs. Chen at his side and said the words they'd waited years to hear. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening in my own home. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. And I'm sorry you ever had to choose between your dignity and your livelihood. Maria cried. Thomas stared at his shoes. Josephine gripped Mrs. Chen's hand like it was the only thing keeping her upright. And Marcus, standing quietly in the back, simply nodded. I'm implementing changes, Liam continued. Effective immediately, we're establishing a staff advocacy program with an independent third-party firm. You'll have access to confidential reporting, mental health resources, and legal support if you ever need it. No one in this house will ever have to suffer in silence again. The staff began to breathe differently, like people who'd forgotten what air tasted like without fear mixed in. Later that afternoon, Liam found Marcus in the garden cleaning equipment shed, organizing supplies with the same quiet precision he brought to everything. Do you have a moment? Liam asked. Marcus set down the cleaning solution and turned, giving Liam his full attention. I wanted to thank you, Liam said. What you did that day in the foyer, standing up for yourself when everyone else had learned to stay silent, it changed everything. You gave everyone else permission to tell the truth. I just said what was real, Marcus replied. The mirror was clean. It was more than that, and you know it. Liam smiled, tired but genuine. You showed more courage than I did, and I'm supposed to be the one in charge. He paused. I hope you'll stay. I know this house holds difficult memories now, but I'd like the chance to make it the kind of place it should have been all along. Marcus looked out at the gardens, at the mansion that had housed so much hidden pain, and something settled in his expression. "I'll stay," he said. "My work here isn't finished yet." That evening, Marcus sat in his small apartment above the garage and opened his laptop. His sister's face appeared on the screen, bright and animated as she talked about her literature class and her new friends and the paper she was writing about social justice narratives. She was thriving at college, exactly as their parents had dreamed. "How's work?" she asked, the question she always asked. Marcus looked around his room, at the steady paycheck that made her education possible, at the job where he could finally stand tall, at the household learning to heal. "It's good," he said, and meant it completely. "I'm exactly where I need to be." His sister smiled, understanding in the way that siblings do when words aren't enough. "I'm proud of you, Marcus." "I'm proud of us," he replied. When the call ended, Marcus sat in the quiet of his room and allowed himself something he hadn't felt in the 3 weeks before that moment in the foyer. He allowed himself peace. Not because the world was perfect or because justice had been fully served, but because he'd kept the promise he made at his parents' grave. He'd stood up when standing up mattered. He'd refused to bend when bending would have been easier. And in doing so, he'd helped an entire household remember what dignity looked like. The Heart Estate would never forget the billionaire's wife who tried to rule it through fear. But it would also never forget the janitor who reminded everyone that truth, spoken calmly in the face of power, could still change everything.
Thanks for sticking with us until the end of this story. If you enjoyed it, you're in for a real treat with the next one. It's even crazier and more captivating than you can imagine. Don't miss out. Click on the image on your screen now to dive into the next exciting chapter.